You are now entering PaleoRadio.
Welcome to PaleoRadio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
What an amazing day it is to be alive, my friends. My name is Jeremiah Bannister.
And I'm Joe Elder.
You know, I was bummed, man, in a way, knowing that I was going to lead the show because I had a nickname for myself this time, Joe.
What was that?
White chocolate.
White chocolate.
It was given to me.
Oh, yeah?
At the gym.
Given to quite a few white folks.
Well, I was one of two that went to the gym on Saturday. I did this drop-in thing. I go to the Croc Center in Grand Rapids, and I play some hoops, and I like playing 5-on-5. And this is the first time I went on a weekend on a Saturday, and it's a little bit different. The way you don't just walk in and just, pick a team or say I'm next or any of that stuff. You actually have to sign in. And then you get a little wristband, and you go in, and you have to sign in on a team, and some people come with others and all this. So it's a more organized thing. You get 10 minutes. But, man, I went lunging for a ball, and I was doing some sweet moves. I ain't going to lie. I was doing a little bit of ankle breaking. And I missed it. I dribbled between my legs or something, and it went going wild. And then I went wild and was running down the court, and it looked ridiculous. I don't know if you've seen the movie Popeye, the old one with Robin Williams. Yeah, well, what's his name? What's the guy with the hamburgers that loves the hamburgers? Anyway, he's chasing his hat on the ground at the beginning of the movie, and he's reaching down and he's kicking his hat and he's running for it and kicking his hat and running for it, but he's legitimately looking as though he's trying. Mm-hmm. That is what I looked like. And I was just rumbling and tumbling my way down the court trying to grab this loose ball, slid and almost hit the wall. It was just so ridiculous. And all the guys, there's like 40 dudes, and they're all like, whoa, the whole group. Yeah. And this guy's like, I'm telling you, he's white chocolate. And so from now on,
so there it is.
I'm white chocolate,
nickname.
bro. I earned it, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations
Thank
to you.
Oh,
man. Well, welcome to PaleoRadio.
Yes.
We have quite a list of different topics tonight. We're going to be talking about quite a few different things.
Yeah.
We will be talking about the Russian scandals that's going on, or early developments of them, or if they are scandals, we want to kind of get into that. We're also going to be talking about Bill Maher having Milo Yiannopoulos on his show this weekend.
That was hotly controversial. I think
yes,
he might be the missing link in the whole PizzaGate controversy.
There you go.
Might be.
Yes.
We're going to talk about something, a day without immigrants. And I have a personal story, in fact, to tell. And it is a personal one. It's one that anyone who's familiar with my beliefs regarding immigration or citizenship or anything like that, it'll be a touching story. You're not going to want to miss it.
Yes.
It's a good one.
Yes, and then we're going to be talking about human evolution. This is an old TED Talks that I just am fond of that I wanted to revisit with Juan Enriquez, where he's talking about how very soon maybe our children will not be Homo sapiens. They could be a different species based on our technological advancements that we just can't really say we're the same. Interesting idea, interesting thoughts. We're going to kind of rehash that.
I thought that was interesting, too. I went back and I'm watching that video and the show prep, and I'm watching it and I'm thinking, he actually points out 2017 as the year that some of the financial stuff, the economic stuff is projected to begin happening.
Yes.
And this is before 2017. So he's making a prediction. It's kind of like this might be our Back to the Future moment. I mean, people, Back to the Future said 2016 in the movie.
With the Cubbies, right? And
right.
With the high-top Nikes and all that.
Yeah, and so, hey, it might be one of these kind of things that happens, and we'll see. But it's fascinating, too, because he's talking about transhumanism, right? He's talking the robot revolution, stuff like this, that's happening right before our eyes, technological revolution that people don't even grasp the meaning of certain things like, oh, wow, this thing that the doctors and scientists made allows blind people to see light and darkness, those shades and stuff. Oh, it's kind of neat. That's more than neat. Like you don't understand. Peace built onto that. Peace built onto that. Peace built onto that. All of a sudden, blind people see. Period. End
That's
of story.
right.
We're going to talk about stuff like that, and we got a bunch of these kind of fun stories too. A squirrel that's a hero in Idaho.
Yeah, hero squirrel.
A 7'7" teenager playing basketball. He's the second tallest player right now in the world. and they say he's taller than any NBA player right now. But he's super in that your eyes are going the same way my son. For people who didn't see this, obviously you're listening to radio. It's kind of like what was it, Perot and his charts on radio.
Yeah.
But Joe, his eyes, he's looking around like thinking in his head, and he'd know he's a numbers guy. He's thinking about. Is it true that 7'7" is the tallest?
Is the tallest?
Yeah.
I think it would be.
Yeah.
My guess. I remember before it was. Before it was Yao Ming, it was Sean Bradley, who was 7'6", and before it was Sean Bradley, it was George Mirasan, who was 7'7".
Rick Sims.
Yeah.
Sims was 7'7".
Sims was 7'7". Manute Bull back in the day. But
right.
Manute was like
7'8".
I'm not sure. I don't think he was taller than Mirasan was. Because when Mirasan was in at 7'7", he was the tallest person to have ever been in the NBA before we had Mao. So... Or Yao, I'm sorry.
Was it Rick or Rick Smits?
Rick Smits was 7'4".
Rick Smits was 7'4".
Yeah, he was.
Is there a guy named Rick Sims, or am I just pulling this right out of my ears?
Rick Smits.
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
The old Indiana Pacers.
Yeah. So listen, we got a whole bunch of these really awesome topics, but we decided going into this, we're looking at these different things, we're rolling them around, trying to figure out a good order for them, and we figured the Maher topic, man.
Yeah, it'd be a good one to just at least jump into. Because it brings in free speech. It also brings in just, I guess, expression in general. And I think the big important factor is bringing in the idea of debate. Is it worth debating people that you vehemently disagree with, even to the point where you think that the person's views are intentionally derogatory? Do you still debate with them? That I think is an interesting question that we should try to answer.
And at any point during the show, at any point, and it doesn't have to be about the specific topic we're talking about at the time. We do prefer that people, of course, remain on topic with the show. So if it goes along and you're not able to call about an earlier topic until later, that's perfectly fine. Give us a call, 616-656-1680. And again, thank you to everybody who's listening to us online on your iPhones and on your apps. We love our iTunes and our Spreaker audience. So, all right, Larry Wilmore. Schools Milo Yiannopoulos, go F yourself. During the overtime segment, the former nightly show host took it to the alt-right troll. This is by Marlo Stern over at the Daily Beast. Larry Wilmore, a former Daily Show correspondent and nightly show host, who now serves as the executive producer of ABC's Blackish and co-creator of HBO's Insecure, was one of the panelists on Friday night's edition of Real Time. And during the overtime segment that aired exclusively online, he squared off against Yiannopoulos. Did you see this?
I did.
In real time?
I did.
You saw real time in real time?
I didn't watch it in real time. I watched it after because I was driving. Yeah. I was on the road. But I did watch I watched the exchange.
Yeah, so after being asked by Maher why he singled out a transgender student for ridicule, and this is something Dan Arrow brought up on the show. During a recent speech at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Yiannopoulos intentionally referred to the former student as a he, and in parentheticals, she is a she, saying, quote, "He'd already left the university, and I make no apologies for protecting women and children from men who are confused about their sexual identity." End of quote. The Breitbart editor continued, "I do it on purpose. I misgendered this person. I think women and girls should be protected from having men who are confused about their sexual identities from their bathrooms." Maher responded, "That's not unreasonable."
That's right. Maher did respond, "That's not unreasonable," which I think, when you break it down, I think the claim of what he said isn't unreasonable. I think the connecting dots that need to be made is connecting that people who are transgender are certainly confused about their sexuality, which I don't know if that's necessarily the case. And even in Wilmore's defense, my defense of that can be looped in with what Wilmore said, where he disagreed, saying, "I just think it's sad because the same arguments that were used against gay people, treating them like they're aliens who just want to..."
Yeah, we had to catch ourselves.
Explicit word, anything that moved, and that's why we should avoid them at all costs, are being used. So for the sake of the quote, I'm going to read it again without that blank in there. So he says, "I just think it's sad because the same arguments that were being used against gay people, treating them like aliens who wanted to blank anything that moved, and that's why we should avoid them at all costs, are now being used on the trans community. It's terrible.
Yeah.
There's a difference without a distinction because it's using the type of arguments. It's like when people try to compare gay and black. Yeah, they're not the same thing. We share an invisibility. People didn't see us in society, and gay people hid out from society. But there were a lot of the same issues that you have to deal with when you're marginalized."
I know this is going to be really, really risky to say, but I'm going to do it. because the crux of the argument here is that it's the same type of argument. But that argument right there is the same type of argument that I heard on, who was it? Was it John Oliver? Or, no, it wasn't John Oliver. Who was it that interviewed a man who is defending pedophilia? And he was defending it, saying that young people, that he is a celibate pedophile, right? That he says, that is what I love. I love children, but I do not because it's illegal. I'm not out there doing this. Whether or not people believe him. Okay.
Yeah.
The argument back from that is it's gross, it's against the law, it can cause problems health-wise, it's bad psychologically. Those are a lot of the same arguments that people have used against trans people.
Yeah, and gay people.
Yeah, and gay people. So I'm not saying...
And now they don't use it against gay people.
And now they don't use it against gay people. And that is why a lot of the conservative people in the past have said, well, it's a slippery slope. And I think, yes, the argument works. But I'm interested to see the safeguards that say, and this is why I draw the line here and not on where the slippery slope is.
Yeah, well, and I think consent's the answer to that. A
Right.
child, you argue about their ability to understand consent. That's why having sex with a kid isn't a good idea. I mean, that's if you're trans and it's consensual, I think it changes a lot of the aspects of that. But the kicker to what Larry Wilmore said, which I think is important, is you have Milo, who is gay, who is also, based on this interview, extremely and terribly confused about himself, let alone other people. I don't know if he's even in a position to speak about other people's sexuality based on what he was saying. But I think the big kicker is that this is exactly right. When conservatives say it's a slippery slope, yeah, we've slipped into wanting to give transgender people more access and more rights. I'm okay with this slip. I'm totally okay. I'm sliding down the hill in a baseball slide right now for that. I'm okay with it. I was okay with it for gay people. The idea of if we let gay people get treated equally, then what's going to happen? Well, the other people that are not getting treated equally are going to ask for it too. And if we want to call that definition slippery slope, we can. But I don't really know if that's a bad position.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a slippery slope, especially if you qualify it and say this is why it's not. And I remember I used to talk about this thing, mountaintop morality theory. It was something a name I came up with for this. But basically saying that the whole idea when debating ethics in law that there is a slippery slope. It's kind of like a iconic symbol of. I always think Bullwinkle for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but I always think back to this of a pointy mountaintop, with the snow at the top of it. It's got the little white cap on it, and then it's got people teeter-tottering on the tip of the point. And they're looking down slopes on both sides.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is a cartoon. That's not how reality even works. Any decision of that magnitude, even ones that people think are just radically revolutionary, rarely ever would turn out in such a way to be that I'm sliding down and I don't know where it ends. Whoa! And that is just not very real. And I think that it has different levels. At the top of any mountain that you can go from side to side. And so I don't even think that half the time, I think it's a good fear for us to have.
Sure. It's a
It's a practical
thing
one.
to think about things snowballing out of way. Like a good example is tax, even income tax, right? That's a great conservative example, which is true of saying this isn't something that was planned on staying, but here it is. And it became a huge amorphous blob that now we can't even control. That is a serious slippery slope argument towards government. Larry Wilmore goes back and says, he continues, you can always find an extreme person that becomes the object of your attack to assign that to everybody. So if you say, well, that person is weird or they want to commit sexual assault, then people think all transgender people want to do is commit sexual assault. And Yiannopoulos shot back with saying, well, they are disproportionately involved in those kind of crimes. That's not a controversial statistic. And frankly, you're suggesting these people are victims of some kind of discrimination. Well, I'm saying to you is this is a psychiatric disorder, not identity disorder or like sociopathy.
I'll tell you, I think what's interesting is this. He says they're disproportionately involved in those kind of crimes. We had a show a while back where we talked about the issue of bathrooms. And in fact, some people online did not like it. And they flagged us on Facebook and said, we don't like this. This is a bad thing. In that segment, we talked about just how hard it was to find any reports on crimes where people even dress up.
That's right.
And I said there was like 3 or 4 that you could find. And I'm like, so when he says they're disproportionately involved in those kind of crimes, that's not a controversial statistic. I protest that, Milo.
Yes.
I defy you to show me more than what we talked about in a way that says disproportionate. We'll be back.
Stick around, folks.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Welcome back to Paleo Radio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. Jeremiah Bannister, Joe Elder.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. I'm telling you, Joe, it was crazy. We're sitting here talking, getting ready for this segment here, trying to figure out what topic to talk about next, and all of a sudden I heard the music come through on the headphones, and I'm like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah, jumped in real quick. We were having a nice long talk.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, but we want to bring someone in from the phone lines here. We've got Stan the Man. How you doing, Stan?
What's up, Stan?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning
sir.
to you, my friend.
And which one is the eagle and which one is the dragon?
Yeah.
Joe is eagle.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm dragon. I have a dragon pin, actually, that I've picked up since that was made that I wear on my hat. And I think that the picture where I'm blowing that plume of vapor into the air, I think that's where we put eagle and dragon for the first time, where it was obvious where you're eagle and I'm dragon.
Well,
Dragon
I like
and
it.
Eagle. It's good
Yeah,
stuff.
love it.
Yes.
Hey, I just had a brief thing that I went through when I was taking a long time ago. I took philosophy class, and we were talking about a right and a privilege. Is there a distinction between those two, and if so, what are they? Or how do you look at that? Because there are certain rights as a citizen here in America, and there are certain privileges that we give to all people, whether they're a citizen or not.
I would say rights and privileges are different. I would say that and I'm willing to be challenged on this. I mean, this is kind of on the fly thing. This is an interesting conversation, but that someone can have rights and yet not be privileged, and someone can have rights and be privileged. Like, for example, take the situation with blacks and whites. On paper, the right would be that they have the right to vote, but privilege plays itself out in such a way that institutionally over time, you go from a place where it was just blacks, you don't vote, period, to a place where, well, we're making some changes, but we still don't like the blacks. And so it kind of plays it out in this way to over time to even a place where they say, well, listen, we, honest to goodness, don't have a problem with black people. So because we don't have a problem with black people, therefore the privileges that have worked their way out over time, that those privileges aren't real. And yet we can look at it and say, how difficult is it, in fact, at times for black people to vote, even to have the necessary paperwork in order to vote, how much it costs. I remember doing a segment years ago on the difficulties of this and things I didn't even know. I'm like, I don't experience this. I don't know many white dudes who do have this particular sort of difficulty.
Yeah.
So they have the right, but they don't have this privilege in that sense. They're unprivileged.
In a way, I would say that means they also don't have the right. Because, I mean, on the paper it says it, but in practicality, we know very well that people don't have the same access to things and don't have the same. It's not even opportunities. When they say that, that's a buzzword for most people too. It's that, just like voting, we know that people have a right to vote, and we know that a good majority of people don't get to vote. Mm-hmm. And so, in actual statement of fact, is that a right? No, it's not, because we mess with it and we take it away from people. So
isn't there a phrase in the Constitution, inalienable rights?
Yes. Well, they are inalienable, but again, it's on. This is why I think that Type A. This is bold guess here too, but
all right.
It's why I personally believe that a lot of people that are Type A personalities tend to lean more conservative, because when you look at paper says equal. The documentation in America about how people should be treated is very equal. The social aspect of it, which is kind of getting more into your bee brain, right? The actual messiness of putting it together says very plainly that it's not evil, or it's not equal at all. It's not a fair shake for people. So I think that when people they compartmentalize things in very rigid borders and orders. They'll say, it says on paper everyone has the right to vote. People who don't vote just didn't want to vote. And then there's others that say, it says it on paper, but the way you lay it out in the government and the real world is that other people do not get the access to it like we do. So I think that there is you can distinguish them like Jeremiah is saying, but I don't know if people really have inalienable rights in this country, period. I mean, I'll openly throw it out there as a question that I think it's worth debating if people actually do have inalienable rights in the United States.
Or if and I look at it and say a policy is only as good as its application and enforcement. And so if you say, well, we have this policy and it says everybody's treated equally, but everybody kind of knows in their gut that that's just simply not true, and they can point to numerous different stats to say, I don't know about this. And we're not talking just about results. I mean, I get that argument. Well, you want equality of results. No. I'm not even talking that. I'm not even talking equality of access in the way where it's like, well, affirmative action or anything like that. I'm saying, listen, sticking with the vote thing, just go and look at the difficulties that people of other races, particularly black people, experience all across the country in different states to different degrees because they have control in those states over that, over how hard it is for them to even access the booth. And that is where you say, okay, so on paper that's the case, but in reality, let's just let's track this black man throughout the election year and find out the steps he goes through, and how difficult that is. And so, but I just want to say this too, as last thing, I guess, on this is just to say, if let's say we're all equal, let's say we reach a place or we have a policy that somehow does that, are there rights without privileges? Like, if that's true, you can distinguish them.
Well,
but
if we're trying to find egalitarian state, then we start out with a premise that all men are created equal. Okay?
Yes.
And to me, I would think, like, and I'll get off the air after this, but I'm saying that I think what Trump is doing is taking this to a point where he says, okay, we take a class of people, like aliens, whatever, and if we grant them access to America or whatever America offers, it's a privilege that we can either give them or deny them. And if we go back to the Constitution, we're saying if all men are created equal, we can't do that unless they break the law, unless they're in conflict with our thing. And I'll get off the air and let you guys throw that around. And I'm enjoying. I'll just listen.
Yeah, thank you, Stan.
Yeah,
Thank
and listen,
you.
if anyone wants to, contest it, if you say, hey, you guys you're talking crazy, this is nonsense, give us a call, 616-656-1680. This is an interesting question, and actually Nathan brought up, he was looking through some of my books recently, him and William, and they both saw this book that I had called Race and Privilege from school. That helped before I took that class, it was a debate class where we were assigned different topics to debate. We didn't even believe a lot of the topics that they gave to us to defend. So you had to learn how to do that, and you had to learn the other side to things. But it really started to kind of illuminate aspects of my education that before that were just simply non-existent. I mean, they just weren't real. And so I would be interested to hear what people think about that, about law and privilege, about rights and privilege. And I'm kind of with you on the whole inalienable thing, is I say that sounds nice. And a nation can believe that of themselves. And they can believe that of other people. They can do that, but does that make it true?
That's right.
Or our laws, and the last thing about privilege is to say, on immigration, is that I come from a position anyway that says I don't believe that it's a philanthropic thing, that's the main reason for our immigration, or that we're not a mission for the world. Like I take that position, and I take a position that says that nobody has a right per se to come in. That's why we make laws, and we have things that say this is what you have to reach or meet in order to be here. That's why we can bar some people and not others. That's why we do that.
Yeah.
And just take the worst element. I mean, just say we're only going to limit the absolute worst, the rapists, stuff like that. we do that, which means inherently we don't consider that a full-blown right.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's true. And another one of just playing it out there, too, is on paper it would say that our immigration system should take 3 years to get you in. In practicality, it takes 11. I know that from personal experience, firsthand experience trying to get people into this country to get green card access or get citizenship. So it's one of those cases as well where many people will look at what it says to come to this country and say, well, this is reasonable and it makes sense. And it does, other than the process takes 3 to 4 times as long as we think or say it does. And that may be the kicker that's driving more people to immigrate to the country illegally, is in the many cases that we had with individuals we worked with, they were partly along getting their citizenship for the United States and said, I can't wait anymore, I'm going. Many people that were in their mid-40s were people that were maybe 20% through of their immigration system and had been waiting for 4 years and said, my bean farm froze. I don't have food this summer. There's nowhere for me to go. I don't have any family or friends to go to. I didn't have a choice. I had to wait, so I left. And I took and I'm not justifying, I'm just saying the nature of the position. So there's other things we can do where I totally agree. We have a right to defend the border and to look at and vet people who come in. I think our process for vetting should be to the standard that we think it is instead of what it truly is. And I think that also is kind of an implication on why we have an immigration issue on the southern border.
I'm so glad that Stan brought up immigration because we're actually going to talk about this in the next segment. I had an interesting experience, a real personal one. I hope people stick around to listen. But the day without immigrants, the protest that went on. But I'm wondering, as we're kind of just wrapping this up, about what happens in a situation. What do we think of this? Where let's say you have a right that you put into place, and you say these people have a right, like gay marriage. These people have a right to get married, but culturally, that right was granted to people. Let's say within a cultural setting where people are not entirely down with that. And that puts people at a place where people who are straight are still privileged in that sense, right? And that you have to go to specific places that might be okay with marrying gay people. And those might be few and far between, right? And in some places, almost non-existent other than going to a justice of the peace. As it plays itself out, that doesn't seem very equal.
No.
Right? And at the same time, they would still have that right.
Sure.
And so the way that rights play themselves out incrementally over time seem to be that over time culture will acclimate, by and large.
It will, and the people that have their hand on the buttons and the dials will be constantly calibrating it towards their benefit. And it doesn't matter who it is. So now we're talking about race, but you have a predominantly white governing society, and hey, shock horror, we have a predominantly white favored society in our country too. So it's not a big surprise. But stick around, folks. We're going to be talking about the Day Without Immigrants. It's going to be a fantastic topic. It affected us here in Grand Rapids and all over the country. 95.3 FM, 1680 AM.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Oh my gosh, Joe. We got a Fox News alert.
Fox News alert.
Fox News alert. A plane hit a deer on takeoff. PSA Airlines flight to Mississippi. Forced to return to airport. Crew was evacuated. This is actually a couple days ago, Joe, not gonna lie.
And then it was raining pink mist for 3 days.
Oh my gosh. I was, boy. It was, but it was a Fox News alert. It was hilarious. We're going through, and we got a whole bunch of these funny stories, about the squirrel, the bees, the late fee, those crazy, violent hawks at a golf course. So we go to all different sites and stuff for the weird news, and Fox has one of those too.
Yes.
So I go on there, and I click on it, and I'm seeing this thing, and it threw me back in this weird world, man, where I'm driving down the highway. I'm probably like 21 years old maybe at the most. Driving down the highway, going like 75, and this golden retriever goes running out in the road, man. And I'm like, oh, my gosh. And I'm freaking out about it. But it makes it all the way across into the median, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you lucky guy. Well, he turns around.
Doubles
back. right at my car.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, whoa. And I try swerving out of the way. Oh, no. I just clobbered that thing with
poor
the
guy.
front left side. Oh, he wasn't dead all the way for about 3 seconds. Because as I look out the rearview mirror, his body's just tumbling down the road. And there's a semi-truck going about 70 behind me. And that thing just, I will never forget what I saw. And
So-
I pulled off the road, man, and I go into this gas station, and I'm just kicking my car. I'm mad.
Mad, yeah,
Because
sure.
this was like, it's a golden retriever. I mean,
Yeah.
this isn't like some...
It wasn't a possum.
No.
Sorry, PETA, but let's not equate the two.
Yeah, so I can only imagine a deer being hit by a plane.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure that is not going to be good.
Yeah, not good at all.
No. So...
Yeah.
We have
There we
clean
go.
break-
There's
clean
a
break and
segue.
transition, right? Deer gets hit by a plane. By the way, Day Without Immigrants.
Yes,
No, okay.
yeah.
So there was a Day Without Immigrants,
Yes.
which was really impressive turnout. Even I mean,
It was-
or lack of a turnout, if you want to say, for certain institutions.
It was visibly obvious.
Yes.
If you went to institutions locally, and I can't speak of anywhere outside the area, but locally that day, you could drive. In fact, I'll just say it now. Let's just say it at the beginning. I'll just tell you what happened. I go to, we're with the family and we're talking about eating and what we're hungry for. And we don't go out to eat that often. But we decided, we're like, well, let's go to this place, the taqueria here in town. We're up on Division. So we go, it's this small eatery. You know, you walk in, it has a lot of benches. You can go outside. It's real cool. You go in totally authentic, right? Totally authentic. And we go, and I walk up to the door, and I reached my hand out to open the door, and that bad boy was locked.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at the door, and right there on the door it says "A Day Without Immigrants." And I just paused, and I looked at it. I mean, I'm serious. People who know me and who know my views on immigration, I'm a restrictionist. I have been my entire life. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this is actually an interesting thing for me. I'm glad that I'm seeing this. And so then we drive to the Croc Center to go play some hoops. And we get there, and the place is just empty. And I started thinking, and there's normally a bunch of kids that come in, and they have half the gym, and the older guys have the other half. There were white people and black people. And there were a smattering. There were a couple that I know are Hispanic and Latino, right? But the overwhelming number of brown kids were not there. And it was quiet. And the optics of it for me were interesting because it was in America that's mainly just black and white. And I'd never seen something in that way where I was primed, even because of an experience before that, to really ponder just even visibly how much of my day is actually made up of people who are immigrants or identify in solidarity with people who right now are kind of under the hatchet with Trump's immigration policies.
Yes.
And so to me, I'm glad that I was able to play ball mainly by myself that day. In fact, there weren't even enough people, I don't think, to play 5-on-5. And so I was playing by myself, and I was grateful for that time to reflect on things. And I have some thinking to do on different matters.
And also just a note here in Grand Rapids that we have a heavy population of refugees and immigrants from Sudan, as well as people that are from Nepal and Laos and from some other areas in our refugee program. So it's an interesting. That's why Grand Rapids, of all, most people may not think about it because obviously they think of immigration. People think of policies like what they're going to do on the southern border, but you really do have a hub for refugees here in Grand Rapids. It's a city that has quite a few people that have come here from a different country or are first or second generation born. So it is not a surprise to see it affecting Grand Rapids. And then when we get into where it affected totally, I mean, it was a big deal. It's a very big deal.
And I'm eating strawberries, interestingly enough,
Yes.
after an article
Without
talking about it. Yeah.
Without whipped cream or anything, there's no
the
sexuality
strawberries,
to the strawberry eating.
The guy who wrote this, I tried reaching out to him, and it was too late. I just didn't think of it in time. But his name is Jeff Smith, and I saw him because that day, as we were going to the Croc Center, we're driving down Division, and we pass by this. There's a large, just a sea of people, almost all brown. In fact, and he notes this at the end, the very tail end. I told him I'm actually grateful for it. And in the correspondence we had, he said, I said I noticed him, and he said it's easy to see
the really
tall white guy with white long hair and a big white beard, and he just stood out like a sore thumb. He was the only one that looked like that in this large group,
which like Santa Claus.
Which I know he was bummed about and said, hey, we need to say this. There weren't many allies that were there for this particular thing, but at the same time, that was an optic I'm actually grateful that I saw. Mm-hmm. That there were that many people, and they weren't a bunch of white people. I'm actually really grateful that white liberals stayed home.
For this one. Because this time I got to see the protests walking down the streets. I got to get, and he, of course, is great, Jeff. He quotes people in this, not a bunch of white protesters. You got to see the actual marginalized society debate or protest?
You got to see that. And I thought, of all of the stuff that was missing, and I told my kids that day, I said, they're trying to paint a picture. What is the one big missing thing? Is they were like, well, you don't know if everybody who didn't come to school is an immigrant.
Well, they're not.
They're not
even close.
Not even close.
90% of them are legal citizens who have an aunt, uncle, grandma, or grandpa, or somebody who's dealing with ICE that they think is. So
when you saw that, you're not able to really paint that picture as nicely in the mind. Because that is a blurrier image when you have whether or not it's an immigrant, whether or not it's somebody from Mexico, whether or not it's somebody from Sudan. But when you then have that additional optic added to that, that helps to fill in a blank where you're like, I at least see that. And that's actually what that's about.
Well, and even if it's blurry, it shows the social destruction that it can cause by doing what we're proposing to do. I mean, the idea of door-to-door checking and the using of police forces to do it, which is starting to happen right now, by the way. Not all over the country, but in certain places that are allowing it to happen, where ICE and immigration are using local police forces to identify and find people. That is, I think, for the militarization of police is one of the largest concerns we should have in probably the last 5 to 10 years, short of the military sending them heavier arms.
I thought it was cool, too, because I decided – at first I didn't even know. And I got to be honest, this past week I've been trying to do better about nicotine. I'm down to 3% and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And, as I wasn't checking the news. So I wasn't going on Facebook. I was trying to stay really active and just all day long doing activity to get away from things. So I didn't even know this was going on. And I'm just being flat out honest with everybody. I was not paying attention to the news, and apparently a lot of other people were. I didn't go on Facebook and check my stuff. So that's how I found myself there in the first place. I wasn't being audacious. But then I thought, Angela said, well, yeah, I think there's that protest today. I think I saw someone. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, what about their competition? Like right up the road. They would have commercial incentive to do that. I mean, that's American as apple pie. So I'm like, well, let's go ahead and see what their competition. So I go. Now, they had an open sign. They had 2 of them. Their open sign wasn't lit, but they had their other open sign turned on. Or not on, but flipped around. It was real big. So I went, and that was also locked up.
Yeah.
But, I said, well, throw them a bone because they turned the light off at least so that they're not open.
Yeah.
But I thought about that, and I said, this is actually especially big deal. They're willing to seriously take a hit, even if
their business.
Listen, if you know your competition up the road is closed
for the day,
and you're right up the road, and you're like, listen, I'm going to be back tomorrow. I mean, it's not like we're leaving all the way. So I mean, we can make the protest. It still makes the point. You could imagine all the reasons why a business would say, I'm going to open, but they didn't.
Didn't do it.
They didn't do it.
Yes.
And to me, that was doubly interesting. And so I was the whole thing to me. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful that people did this. I'm grateful that it worked out the way it did. And I encourage people, check out that article by Jeff Smith over at GRID, Grand Rapids Institute for Information Democracy.
Yeah, we've got a couple minutes, so we'll dive into that before we go to the next break. But this is, again, by Jeff Smith. He says, yesterday, which was, would it be Friday, I believe it was? Yeah, Friday. Yesterday, over 1,000 people marched in Grand Rapids for the immigration rights and to send a clear message to people of power. Aquí estamos y no nos vamos. We are here and we are not leaving. People gathered near a store owned by Latinos on Division, just a few blocks north of 28th Street.
That's where I was.
There were a few people who spoke, which energized the crowd, and then the march began around 5:20. There were also lots of flags being carried or waved, some American flags, but mostly some Mexican and Guatemalan flags. I asked a few people about why they were carrying the flags of their home country. One person says it was because they wanted to demonstrate the pride they have in their country of origin. Another person said they were angry at the U.S. government for wanting to build a wall along the U.S. and Mexican border and because of the recent ICE raids being conducted in the country, even in West Michigan. Then they took their march to 28th Street, and again, both westbound lanes were taken up by marchers in the middle of the turn lane. Despite blocking traffic, lots of people were honking their horns in support of the march, with people waving and taking pictures with their cell phones.
And people driving by like me, who
Yeah.
are just like, this is this. Yeah, what is this? And hey, it was fascinating enough that I told my kids, I said, hey, I know that guy's there, so I know where I can go and read about it.
Yes.
I know for a fact, like Jeff Smith is gonna write about this. And I thought, I'm so glad that he asked that question. He's good at what he does. I don't agree with him on everything, but
because
he's really
that
good at
raises
what he
questions,
does.
you know.
To say why are you carrying a Guatemalan flag, or why a Mexican flag? Why not more of the red, white, and blue?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to hear those answers, people need to. You hear that a lot, where dissenters, people who don't like the protests, will be like, "Well, look, they're carrying those flags. They must hate America." Well, I don't think that's what that's about. That didn't come through. It came through that they were angry. But why are they angry? Read the reasons why, and then try to sit in their shoes for a second. It's an interesting consideration. I encourage everybody to try it.
Exactly right. So many students did not show up for Grand Rapids Public Schools that they forced GRPS administration to declare snow day. So that's just another info. So stick around, folks. We will be right back.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
It's a beautiful Michigan morning here in studio of WPRR, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM. Joe Elder alongside Jeremiah Bannister.
It's true, the one and only. You got to call us, 616-656-1680, if you would like to be part of the program. Of course, every single one of our episodes are free and available on Spreaker at Spreaker.com/PaleoRadio. And listen, I got to tell everybody, you have to. You absolutely 100% have to go to Facebook.com/PaleoRadio. We're posting there like crazy. And I just was showing Joe during the break. I opened up my iMovie and showed him my projects. And what we're doing, we're breaking down these shows like crazy, Joe.
Yeah, we are. And we're planning on sharing them on our Facebook and also on YouTube if we can.
Yeah, we've already shared a
page.
couple. We shared the SNL one. Did SNL go too far? Had some great, reached a bunch of people, great reactions to it, great conversations. And actually, the biggest conversation of the week on our wall had to do with the issue that we're talking kind of about now, about poll finding D.C. is out of touch with Americans on foreign policy.
Yeah, which not a big surprise, right?
Yeah, this is by Jeremy Lott, a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. He published this over at The Federalist. The foreign policy consensus in Washington, D.C. is so stubbornly pro-intervention that our most recent president, who dragged the country into several foreign entanglements and whose military dropped 26,171 bombs last year alone, is seen as, at best, a ditherer. And this is an interesting, obviously a partisan thing.
Sure.
Right? This is
sure.
from The Federalist. But listen, hear it out. The World Politics Review summed up his legacy by saying, quote, "The problem with Obama's foreign policy has been inaction, not weakness. But if you get outside of D.C., and the estimation of what we ought to be doing is much different. Americans who are actually stretched to pay for those wars and whose children may be serving in the military are not as gung-ho about going there."
Sure.
This has actually been kind of going on for years, though.
Well, this is
So maybe
old
just
hat.
America.
This is old hat. Well,
Yeah,
most
right.
people that are in rural or inner city America that understand that they are amongst the pickings of people that go to fight these wars and not the people that actually dictate the wars themselves or their relatives that go. They're not outside of knowing that they get sent there for different reasons and different purposes, and they are not entirely for the best freedoms of the country, and they just know that to be a fact. And so I think that this is not it's not a new idea that Americans aren't happy with the the government's foreign policy. At the same time, I don't know if they fully understand it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of with you on that too. As I say, I just simply don't believe that many people, if you really ask them to flesh out, number one, what do they believe is national interest? Like, what does that mean?
Sure,
that's a tough one. It's kind of like, and this is a good experiment people can do for themselves. What does it mean to be American? What's America? Mm-hmm. Like those are really difficult things where people are going to have major disagreements over what that means. If they have disagreements over what that means, they're going to have disagreements over interests
and how you influence others, or what your goals are to influence others or manipulate. The word manipulate is usually used in a negative sense, but in here it's used in one where obviously America has foreign interests. We would like to have countries that we trade with have interests that are more akin to ours than others, because then we're likely to get better trade deals.
And
right?
I think people are just more accustomed to playing or playing checkers and not chess.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And geopolitics, when we talk about these things and national interests, it really is, in many ways, a game of chess.
Yes.
The calculations are different. What you have to accept as actually happening is different. Because you're bringing in forces that aren't playing by the rules that in our country, when we talk about how things play out, we're talking about people playing, at least supposedly playing according to the same rules.
Somewhat.
Geopolitics admits that there's a bunch of different rules all over the place that people are playing by.
Well, everybody's trying to, it's like trying to play basketball, but there is no referees because everybody is playing their own version of basketball. It's like one court, right? One court, two hoops, but some people are trying to play 21 and some are trying to play full court and some try to play half court 3-on-3, all on the same baskets and trying to make it work because the incentives are entirely different amongst different nations. And one thing I would contest is, like you said, when people talk about foreign policy, is what we're doing in the Middle East not part of our foreign interests? Like the idea of what our president's saying now, make America great again or put America first. I don't see what we're doing in the Middle East as not putting America first. We're over there because we're trying to take oil to make it easier for Americans to get around. I mean, we have a national interest to be there, and it's not we're not nation building because we care about people in the Middle East. We're nation building because we want those places to sell them their goods, to sell us their goods.
I think some of it, too, is that people, they want this idea that they don't like hearing that we make any kind of deals where it's going to actually kind of require something of us.
Without a doubt.
But it's kind of interesting because they don't want to be involved in such a way where you're the big guy on the block. And I'm saying this as a non-interventionist. I mean, I just am. But saying that we are in that position where we are normally on the top of the bargain all the time because of the bully posture we have in the world.
Without a doubt.
And so the idea that, well, we're going to back down from that and yet still approach the table and walk away with it never requires anything of us that's going to hurt. That is just that I don't believe that that's very realistic.
No, let's put it this way: how many other countries sail their warships through the Straits of Hormuz? How many other countries do? Not one. It's U.S., baby. If it is, it's U.S. with. If it's another ship, it's with U.S. clearance in the Straits of Hormuz. How many times does a Japanese or Chinese warship make a routine trip through the border of international waters and American waters? How many times does that happen? Never. What do we do in the China Sea? We patrol every other month.
All the time.
We send a patrol every other month through the South China Sea. Now, at the same time, like what you're saying is, I think there's also an element of when we go wrong bad. There also is the element of pick on somebody your own size, and you can't always relegate it down to this, but if you're a large man, say you're 6'4", 240 guy, and you're walking down the street and you see another large 6'4", 240 guy shoving people around, throwing people down and pushing them, and you literally may be the only one of stature and size to challenge this person, do you, don't you? It opens up some moral questions. I don't know what the answers are. I think it would depend on what's going on. But there's cases like that, too, where the United States needs to posture to work against other powerful forces. Like when we go through the South China Sea, we want to have trade with China, but we also recognize that China does the bullying game in the South China Sea, and we're trying to stop it. Now, the question is, why don't we think about that and what China's doing there and relegate those actions onto ourselves with what we're doing in the Middle East, where we're doing the same thing that China's doing with those smaller nations in the South China Sea. We're bullying them and manipulating them to get a result that we want.
And I'll say this, I think that, and I mentioned this in our private conversation, but saying that, we may have interests like that where, for example, you have a really big bully. What do you do in this situation where you may be the only person? And I said, my only reservation, of course, or my biggest one, is that I think that kind of like civilization requires an element of violence and a monopolization of power. I think that interventionism will, in more cases than not, and by far, will involve entanglements that aren't of that magnitude.
I agree.
And that is not just like it might happen, because you hear this a lot where they're like, well, we want to keep that philosophy, but let's just not get involved in these other humanitarian things that are very, we can make a case for. Because people do. Every cause has its apologist. And so we find ourselves in a lot of these entanglements all over the place, and I think that it's kind of inevitable. But this poll here, and listen, if you have a competing poll that you think shows that these numbers are not true, and if you don't like the source of these numbers, please share it with us.
Yes.
But the Charles Koch Institute and Center for the National Interest Poll.
And we know what we're saying when we say that.
Yes.
We realize we're not dubious of the fact that we know who the Koch brothers are.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. If you have a competing poll that you think that these numbers are cooked or they're baked or ridiculous, message us at PaleoRadioShow@gmail.com. A majority of those surveyed in late January turned out to be deeply skeptical that what America has been doing has been working. For instance, when asked if America's foreign policy since 9/11 has made us more or less safe, a non-dangling Chad majority, 51% said less safe. Only 11% thought we were safer. Are we safer? A plurality, 47%, said we had made the world less safe, versus only a minority, 9%, who said that we'd made things any better. Asked whether our country's national interests should drive our foreign policy, and there's that question. Okay, a supermajority, 69% in the poll, believe that should drive it. But I don't think that most people understand how this works at all.
Yeah, I think that's having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
That's saying I want to have a foreign policy that puts America first, but at the same time, when America puts America first and goes into places like the Middle East to draw or extract oil, they'll say, well, we shouldn't be going to do that because it's wrong. Well, you are truly having your cake and eating it too. Our national interest may involve violence. Our national interest may involve destruction of other. I mean, if we're only putting our national interest first, we have a national interest in allowing our oil to be coming out of there and not going to Russia to go to Rosneft. That's what it's about, guys.
A plurality of 41% thought we should knock off the promotion of democracy through military power. 24% said we're good to go. Only 11% thought the country ought to deploy more troops to Europe.
Yes.
27% said even our current garrison levels are too high. Of course, defense spending, 79% said any additional tax dollars that come in should go toward domestic spending, not a military buildup. That's huge.
I absolutely agree.
That's huge.
That's great news. Hopefully, and people, if you disagree with us, please let us know. But for the most part, I think Americans do feel that our foreign policy wreaks some havoc. It causes a lot of loose ends, and it causes what the CIA always loves to say, blowback.
And we're going to talk about Russia when we get back. It's going to be a fantastic segment. There's some numbers from this poll on that as well. And we had a caller a little bit ago that wasn't able to get through. Go ahead, give us a call back. 616-656-1680. We'll be back with more Paleo Radio.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Welcome back to the second dynamic, fantastic, and everything great hour of Paleo Radio.
Yeah.
Joe Elder here again with Jeremiah Bannister in studio.
It's totally true.
Boy, you got to watch out for those dive-bombing hawks, huh?
Yeah. You know, we were, during the break here at the top of the hour, you know, we're looking over the second hour notes, and we've got a couple of these funny stories, and we're like, which one should we go with first, man? We got this late fee story that we could touch on. You got this 7'7" teen that's playing basketball. But, man, hawks, these crazy dive-bombing, violent,
Vicious birds. Yes.
Cuckoo birds, dude. Florida golf course recommends umbrellas to ward off dive-bombing hawks. This is by Ben Hooper at UPI. A Florida golf course posted signs advising golfers to carry umbrellas to ward off attacks from territorial hawks. The Orange Tree Golf Club in Orlando said nesting hawks have been known to attack members in some areas of the course around this time of year. And one golfer has already had to get stitches this year after being cut by a bird of prey's talons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not a surprise.
Yeah, right. There was 3 or 4 people, I guess, who were attacked last year.
Yes. And this is just a side note. It's not with hawks, but hawks are some of the more intelligent birds of prey. And we're talking an intelligence level that's pretty impressive. Another one that way is crows. And there's situations with crows that when people do tests on them, like to weigh them and measure them, they wear masks because the crows will recognize them and not forget them years later. This is just a side funny anecdote, but there's a university students that captured some crows on campus and had to catch them, weigh them, that sort of thing. And when they let them go, the crows would caw and haw at them every time they saw them, and did it all the way for the rest of their 4 years at the university. Birds are a very interesting species. They're so clever.
People have to go and check out this video. It's the greatest thing in the world. Apparently, there's a girl by the name of Amber, and I think it's Billow, Amber and Billow. I don't know if it's a radio program or something like that, but she has a video where she's hooked up this camera on the front of her bike, and she's riding. She says there's these magpie.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, magpies.
There you go.
And so, yeah, it's over there. And she's riding her bike, and she has this helmet on that has eyes or something on it. And she's like, yeah, we're going to see if this works. Man, this thing straight up is attacking and like diving down and hitting the helmet. And you can hear it go click, 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 click. And she is freaking out, man. She's running. She's riding that bike so fast. You have to check it out. I'm looking at the YouTube video right now. This woman must have really angered that bird. It's 1 minute and 21 seconds. It takes out the intro where she's describing why she's doing it. There's another one, Amber versus the magpie. But you have to see, this woman must have really angered that bird. You have to see it first because it's hilarious. And the music that they put with it's great. But this golf course, Orange Tree Golf Club in Orlando, put caution, aggressive nesting hawk in the area. Take an alternate walking route. Umbrella advisable. And they posted it on Facebook, and I thought to myself, I said, man, that is not an encouraging thing to have people go and golf at your place. I mean, I'm a golfer.
No.
And I'm thinking, man,
I wasn't looking forward to the only interaction I've had with hawks that have been positive was one that was caught in our garage that I had to let out, and I opened the garage door, and he didn't attack me when I did it, and that is by far the most positive exchange I've ever had with a hawk. They're nasty, man. Those things hurt.
Aren't they trainable though? Like the ones the videos you've shared before.
They are trainable with a asterisk that says this is never going to be your pet, and it's never going to be your friend, and it never belongs in a house, and it never should be pet, and it will not be domesticated. It's to be left in a coop outside on its own in the dark until you go hunt with it, and you actually have to starve it to have it hunt for you. If not, if you took the bell off of them, they have a bell on their leg when you train them. The bell is on their leg to make them know that they're too loud to ambush predators, so they have to rely on you to help them too. If you took the bell off, they'd fly away. They'd never come back. So in a way, it's a controlled capture more than it is a buddy system.
We were going through at the end of the last hour. We were going through talking about the poll that was done, talking about American attitudes toward foreign intervention, and at the very end of that article, it brings up the issue of Russia. And as a segue into our Russian segment, it said 12% in this poll said Russia was Americans' greatest security challenge. 17% said that Russia should mainly be viewed only as a rival. Okay, so less than 20. 29% said Russia should be viewed as a partner. 35% said that they believed in kind of a realistic mix of partner and rival. China, only 5% wanted a confrontation. And I thought, that's why I'd be interested to see any competing numbers, because those numbers seem to be reflective of ones. I'm not sure about the Russia stuff.
No, I think it would be. I think most people, I think the one I would disagree with them on is that they're the greatest security challenge, because I think by far they are.
Yeah.
Personally. But
you're in that, so you'd be in that.
I would be part of the 12% that I think Russia's our greatest security challenge, because ISIS is scary, man, but ISIS can't shut down our energy systems. Russia showed in their proxy war that they know how to shut down grids. So it's just it's a different form of security threat. So I guess it's more of my position on it of what I think is more dangerous. So maybe it has to do with what I believe is more dangerous there. But I'm also in the 35% that say it's a realistic mix of partner and rival. Because I think that's the more important one, is you take it case by case and you say, if X, then Y. If we're in a situation to have diplomatic relations, let's certainly take that route. We don't want to have a negative relationship. But if we're not in a position for diplomatic relationships, let's be firm with our position there too and clear about why. And I think that's the best way to deal with Russia. So the article here is a Vox article. It's the 3 Trump Russia scandal. So this is bringing in not just security threat, but talking about the relationship between Russia and Trump, or what little we know now, what we may find out later. But
and I think that's Beauchamp. I don't know if I
Beauchamp? Zach
Beauchamp. I don't know. Zach.
We apologize.
Yeah, we're talking about Zach.
Folks. That's a longer
over
name.
At Vox.
Yes. So we're sorry about that, Zach B. But over at Vox, he says it's starting to look like President Trump has a Russian problem. Late on Tuesday night, this was of last week, the New York Times reported that members of the Trump's campaign team and other Trump associates had repeated contacts, this is in quote, with senior Russian intelligence officials prior to November's vote. The calls were intercepted by U.S. officials monitoring Russian intelligence, who then leaked the existence to the Times, which that already is a controversial thing to be saying. That our intelligence community directly went to a journalistic affair, and in a way that's not really a whistleblower. Just directly gave information to one of our journalistic groups.
And I think I agree with Glenn Greenwald on this. The leakers, and he titled some, the leakers who exposed General Flynn's lie committed serious and wholly justified felonies. It's a crime. Like what they did, it's a crime, the WikiLeaks stuff. Those are criminal acts that people are engaging in, and people can be pursued and stuff. But these would be felonies that these people committed, but I agree that they're wholly justified. And it's interesting to see how it's playing itself out.
Yeah, it is. And it's the other issue of many people with WikiLeaks, and the claim with WikiLeaks, the defense is that they have what I think is a fabricated moral sense of righteousness. I don't even think WikiLeaks has it, but people paint this picture with them and says they have this moral obligation to transparency that they really believe in, and that's why we let them do the illegal things that they do. I just think that's a questionable route to take. But it also is, too, it's the case of Hillary Clinton, where if there's content to the leaks, then, actually, I shouldn't say Hillary Clinton. Maybe I'll say Donald Trump. Should we focus on the content of the leaks or the leakers?
The content.
Because when we were 6 months ago, everybody wanted to focus on the content and not the leakers. And I think I wanted to know both. I think this is a good case to know both, too. And I think a House Oversight Committee hearing would help clear it up. But they say the report cautions that there's no evidence the Trump staff discussed Russian interference in the election, which is true, or that they discussed Trump at all. And it doesn't disclose whether any current administration officials were among the staffers who had been in contact with Russia.
That's
big. That's
actually
big
a
thing
huge,
to say. That's a huge portion.
That's a big thing. So the report says there's no evidence that Trump staff discussed Russian interference in the election. So that's that the staff didn't discuss it. That doesn't say there wasn't interference, but that the Trump staff didn't, or that they even discussed Trump at all.
Yeah.
Yes.
So worst case scenario would be the assumption that the Trump administration staff was working with Russia to undermine Hillary Clinton, which I thought was not very plausible, right? So they're saying that's not happening. It wasn't like the officials were colluding about, hey, let's give, do this dump or something like that. So that is a very fair point and one that's worth mentioning. But it says in the article, but still, A campaign team having regular contact with a hostile foreign power is highly unusual, to put it mildly. Yet, since the Times reports don't explain what they actually talked about, it ends up raising more questions than it does answers, which I think is also true. And again, a House Oversight Committee would really help to get some findings here and actually get some serious documents in people's hands to read.
This is kind of a saucy article from Vox. I mean, each one of these things, they kind of end with the kind of big admissions like that, where it's kind of like, well, we don't really know too much yet, but it's saucy. That's, I guess, the word that comes to mind for this.
Yes, I think we are. To be completely honest, and I am calling my moonshot right here, I think we're pre-Watergate level scandal. And when Watergate level happened, at the most that people knew was that these guys that were loosely involved with the RNC were doing something at the DNC headquarters, right? That began a paper trail of pulling on a string from House committees that became something that the news just never stopped coming from there until it became huge. And I would be floored to find out that the Central Intelligence communities don't have documentation of what's being said and won't share it. So that's where I think they were going to have some issues, you know. And again, having the conversation with these officials during the election time is a questionable thing, no matter what they're talking about. I mean, it's at least in par with Nixon officials talking to North Korea about the wartime issues before they were elected, while Jimmy Carter was still running the office. That's a problem.
So there's 3 scandals in this.
I'm sorry, when Johnson was running office. I apologize.
Yeah, there's 3 scandals for this. One centers on Russia's interference in the election. Another centers on Michael Flynn. A third involves potential blackmail material Russian intelligence may or may not have on the president.
Which I think is the weakest one of all.
They
so
say
far.
that it is, too.
It's by far the weakest claim of all of this is that the Russians have like a PP tape on Donald Trump, right? That I think is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I'm withholding judgment on that one for sure. I think what Michael Flynn did is worth investigating and look into because he misled Mike Pence about the context of the conversation as well. So I think it's just something to look into. But man, we're in the early stages of this development, I would have to say.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about this when we get back. We've got a bunch of great stories for you. We love doing this show. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/PaleoRadio. We love every single one of you. We'll be right back.
Love Paleo Radio? Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/PaleoRadio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
Welcome back to 95.3 FM, 1680 AM, and Paleo Radio. We are discussing Russia, Trump, and all things connected or disconnected to those allegations. Fox article, again, we're calling him Zach B., our boy, Zach B., out of Fox. But he's got 3 main scandals that he wanted to bring up, or that he had brought up. Scandal 1, did the Trump campaign collude with Russia against Hillary Clinton? So here's a $1 million question. Did Trump or anyone on his team know about the hack targeting Clinton while it was going on, and did they plan their campaign strategy, which is centered on, quote, crooked Hillary, and her emails around Russian interference? Roger Stone said that he was in touch with WikiLeaks, the source through that Russia released the hacks, and he had said that 5 days later, on October 7th, WikiLeaks, 5 days later, when Roger Stone said he was in touch with him, he had let out a tweet, basically. He said 5 days, it's going to happen, something.
He said it would be on Wednesday, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
This is a little misleading.
It is.
Yeah,
but he did say, like, Hillary's done, big news. He missed the day, but he certainly knew something was coming up the pike.
And it was a hilarious thing because, well, technically he never said he was in touch with WikiLeaks. He said he had an intermediary who was in touch with WikiLeaks. So it's kind of misleading, Zach, the way you said it. He wasn't in touch with WikiLeaks. Yeah. Because I remember we talked about this. I said that that happened to him.
But he had to have had a vetted source because the person did release something huge, not the same day, but he said something big's coming, Hillary's done, and then that week later.
And we have to take seriously his blunder because he predicted in advance that it would happen on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But that Wednesday was the 10-year anniversary of WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks had zero interest in doing anything other than doing a huge press conference that talked about their 10-year record.
Yes.
And I remember that day specifically. I watched
big
a lot
day
of it.
for WikiLeaks,
It's
yeah.
a big day for WikiLeaks, and people for like 3 days were just mocking Stone about this. But the extent of Stone, and they mentioned Stone, they mentioned Manafort. In fact, Manafort was the only Trump official identified by name in the New York Times report. Mm-hmm. You know, so you've got, and he's not with them any longer. But you have the Sergei, why would you pronounce the last name?
Ryabkov.
Publicly admitted, he's the Russian deputy foreign minister, publicly admitted that members of Trump's entourage were in touch with Russia. And this is a quote. I cannot say that all of them, but quite a few of them have been staying in touch with Russian representatives. This is something he told the news service Interfax.
Yes, and it says there's no confirmation in the Times report or elsewhere to support the idea that the Trump camp knew about the Russian hack while it was going on. So again, this is why it's just important to break these things down. They may have been talking with Russian officials and representatives, but that doesn't mean they were colluding with them against Hillary Clinton. But it still doesn't mean that they're in the right, because you should not be talking to foreign representatives if you are not part of the government yet. If you're running a campaign, you should not be. For instance, in 2020, if Bernie Sanders runs again, he shouldn't be having discussions with the Chinese government about his plans and policies until he's running, you know, or unless by specific invite. So it's an interesting.
And they mentioned the Steele report, but that's the entirety of point number 3.
Yes.
Yeah. So in scandal number 2, Flynn lied about the overtures to Russia. Did Trump?
Yes, which is a great one, too. That's a great lead-in, because the second Trump scandal begins after the election was over, and this is into the article. That's when Michael Flynn, Trump's pick for the National Security Advisor, made a series of phone calls to Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. On December 29th, the Obama administration announced a series of new sanctions on Russia as punishment for its interference in the U.S. presidential election. The same day, Flynn called Kislyak multiple times.
I wondered, though, if he called multiple times on other days.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're keeping in touch a lot, let's say, and I'm just throwing this out there because I don't know, but if let's say he calls 3 times a day, right? They've been really keeping in touch, like that's what they've been saying. Mm-hmm. Or they keep in touch every day. How many more times that day did he call?
Yeah, was it out of the norm?
Was it out of the norm?
Exactly right. 2 sources told the Post that Flynn had strongly implied that that the Trump administration would be taking care of the sanctions. Strongly implied. See, this is why we need a House Oversight Committee to actually read what was said, because strongly implied means nothing in a report without the actual data in hand.
And we'll know those
sources.
They would have to be interviewed. I mean, we would have to. And what would happen if it's false? I don't want to get too wrapped up in that rabbit trail, but it'd be an interesting thing. What if what if the information doesn't pan out, but it was information that was spread wildly?
Hey, at worst, you have a Benghazi situation.
At worst.
I mean, for real, at worst, you have House Oversight Committees over nothing like Benghazi, which stink, but at the same time, I think it was valuable to have Hillary Clinton go up there and have to defend herself.
I didn't like how Vox, simply they maligned RT as a purely English language propaganda outlet. And I'm like, I get it, but I also admire a number of the people who work for them. Mm-hmm. And I also know a number of other places like Democracy Now! That are wrapped up in that maligning, in my opinion, that took place in the report that talks about anti-American and even un-American type things.
Yeah,
which would embody a huge corpus of my own work and beliefs. I mean, and so I don't know, but minus that, and I have my own opinion about Vox, right, and what Vox is.
True.
Real friendly kind of thing. But they pointed out that Flynn spoke very positively about the prospect of partnering with Putin's regime to fight terrorism. That's something I've done as well. But that he was in RT to give a paid speech at his 10th anniversary dinner in Moscow. And I've seen a picture of this. In fact, you shared an article, I think, that had
I did.
The image, yes, where he's at the head table with Putin himself.
Sitting with Putin in the table.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the other thing is it wrong to be sitting at the table with Putin? Not necessarily. But again, I think some of it comes down to what we define RT is. For instance, like what you were saying. My opinion of it is it's got some well-intentioned Americans on it who have great political analysis, but it is without a doubt a Russian state propaganda-run program. I mean, it's owned by the state of Russia. It's not an independently run company out of Russia. So that's why Vladimir was there. I mean, it's a state-run system. So it would be kind of close to saying that how would we feel?
Is it as independent as Interfax, or is Interfax more independent? I'm asking out of ignorance.
I wouldn't know with Interfax because I'm not very familiar with them either.
Yeah.
But RT I know is directly funded by the state.
And here they say that, at issue is the Logan Act. And I've heard this Logan Act thing for a long time because I used to be into Alex Jones.
Yeah.
And Alex Jones talks about the Logan Act every single time a Bilderberg meeting happens. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting – people need to ask about that. I mean, that's a serious thing. If this is a Logan Act problem, then we may have a Logan Act problem with some of the Bilderberg stuff. Maybe.
We do.
Yeah.
We absolutely would.
It's kind of one of those things. But that's why nobody has been prosecuted under this act. Zero people.
Well, and I think going to the Bilderberg group is a violation of the Logan Act, and it's a serious one. But it would be hard to say that it's similar to what this is. If what happened went on, this is exactly why the Logan Act was written, whether it was written 200 years ago or 300. It was for this exact thing, is that the guy that's the head of your security agency shouldn't be making deals or any type of – he should not be discussing the foreign policy of the United States with anybody, whether it be even Germany, who is not an enemy right now.
That may have been why Russia arrested that top hacker.
Yeah, well,
because that's the accusation.
Russia's accusation is that they were working with the CIA. The Russian news outlets had said that their cybersecurity guys were working with foreign entities.
Yeah, I thought was it Soldatov?
Soldatov, yeah.
Yeah, it said that it was more of a broker thing, and that I have a quote here. It said that it was seen as a sort of broker between an unnamed foreign company and the detained FSB official. So the treason charges could have been a result of him facilitating foreign access to someone with Russian security clearance. And he said, so far I see no evidence to link this case to Russian hacking.
That's right. Yeah. Well, his
so it may have been.
Yes, it may have been. Well, and the good thing or not the good thing, but the bad thing about Russian politics is we'll never know because it's not like this guy's going to go have a trial.
Yeah.
We won't know what really happened. They actually walked into the FSB. This is by the report. We'd have to talk about this later, but they walked in the FSB and put a bag over his head and walked him out in the middle of a meeting in front of everybody.
Wow.
And he's not churned up since.
Yeah, right now there's no public evidence either in favor or against that. And just as a PSA, well, I guess it's not really a PSA because he's shown back up on TV, but old Ben Swan was missing too.
Yeah, Ben
Swan.
We're glad to see you alive and well, Ben.
Yeah, after that PizzaGate thing. So, Scandal 3, does Russia have dirt on Trump? And by the way, yeah, they said right now there's no public evidence either in favor or against that. So far.
That's all on speculation. Yeah. A lot of it is, and this is truly a connecting the dots game. We can't deny it. We know what this is. But they were saying that it maybe is a little bit too ironic that right after the United States said they used human intelligence to verify a lot of what they knew about Russian state secrets, that Russia has been clearing house in their cyber security firms right now with getting people out. So it's a connecting the dots game, certainly.
And the last one's the one that's not really that. It's not really that deep at all.
No.
And it's kind of this thing where people, and I remember when people were sharing this about the Steele report, and they say most of this stuff is completely uncorroborated. When my colleague Sean Illing asked an ex-CIA analyst, Aki Peretz, and I'm glad they mentioned these people, about the memo, Peretz was deeply skeptical. He said, we have no idea if any of this is true. We don't know who these sources are. It's entirely likely that they're feeding the author of this report garbage, as so often happens. But they did find some things in there that are supported. The problem is that the stuff that's supported are things like conversations that happen between Russian people.
Yes. Yeah.
And so they can say, well, on that day, those people did talk. But but anything to do with Trump right now,
it's not very. Yeah. There's not a very heavy amount to it now. And I'll say too, in terms of keeping an open mind, I think that if there is anything to this, it'll come up anyways. But I don't think that we need to have that. I think it's almost in a way a grandiose conspiracy for Trump because it takes a complicated, messy situation and and compartmentalizes it into a nice, easy, they've got him and they're blackmailing him, so he's doing their bidding type argument. And I don't think that's the key. I don't think the key is that. The key is the fact that Donald Trump has been coming out and talking to everybody about lifting oil sanctions. He's putting big coal and big oil back into power, and big coal and big oil have for 30 years wanted a long-standing relationship with Russia in terms of oil and gas trade. And I think that's exactly what this is all about. It's about lifting sanctions so we can have partnerships for oil with Rosneft.
I think what's interesting at the end of this, Trump's weird fondness for Russia has created fodder for years of investigation. I think that's what Vox wants. I think Vox, and I mean this, I think that you have a story where the end of every story is there's no evidence for this, and they're very proud to say that this fondness, if he just wouldn't have been buddies, this wouldn't be on him. I have a real issue with that, Vox.
I would say at least, though, he was never interested until 3 years ago.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Speaking of other news that totally sucks, Joe, the CIA's new deputy director ran a black site for torture.
Yes.
Yeah, it's over Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept. He says in May 2013, the Washington Post's Greg Miller reported that the head of the CIA's clandestine service was being shifted out of that position as a result of, quote, a management shakeup by then director John Brennan. As Miller documented, this official, whom the paper did not name because she was a covert agent at the time, was centrally involved in the worst abuses of the CIA's Bush-era torture regime. As Miller put it, she was, quote, directly involved in its controversial interrogation program and had an extensive role in torturing detainees. Even more troubling, she had a secret prison in Thailand as part of the whole CIA's network of black sites.
Wow.
Yeah, there were 2 detainees that were subjected to waterboarding there and other techniques. The Senate Intelligence Committee's report on torture also detailed the central role she played in the particularly gruesome torture of Abu Zubaydah. And so she was, beyond that, she destroyed some videotapes that showed torture. And interestingly enough, of course, at the black site that she ran and other secret agency locations, it violated multiple court orders as well as demands of the 9/11 Commission and the advice of White House lawyers, was condemned as obstruction by commission chairs Lee Hamilton and Thomas Kean. A special prosecutor and grand jury investigated those actions but ultimately chose not to prosecute. Yeah.
So got away with it.
Yeah, got away with it.
Got away with it.
I'm glad he brought this up because he brings up Pompeo, and he says, listen, it shouldn't come as a surprise. Pompeo himself has said he's open to resurrecting the Bush-era torture techniques. And indeed, Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, was forced to withdraw from the running in late 2008 because of his support for those same tactics, only to be confirmed in 2013. And it's why there are 17 Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, Feinstein, and Sheldon Whitehouse and Tim Kaine, who voted to confirm Pompeo.
Yeah, they did.
There's Tim Kaine.
Yeah, so
it's close to home.
It is close to home, and I also think personally that Democrats have no backbone, so it's not surprising. They couldn't or wouldn't dare do what the Tea Party did in terms of obstruction. They won't do it. If they did, they already would have.
And Gina Haspel, by the way. That's her name.
Yeah, her name is Gina Haspel.
Yeah.
Says she's now slated to become the second most powerful official at the CIA despite or because of the central, aggressive, sustained role she played in many of those most grotesque and shameful abuses of war on terror. And again, let's just not forget that we have a commander-in-chief who full-on supports it, who thinks those tactics work, and he said it. I disagree with the intelligence because they say it doesn't, but I think it works, and I'm not opposed. So, I mean, I feel like we're regressing back into a place that we don't want to be.
I agree. The video you shared, the topic about human evolution.
Yes.
I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
And I think I'd seen it before with you. When was that made?
This was made a couple years ago. But
it's a TED Talk.
I'd love to share it, though.
Yeah,
it's just such an interesting take on human evolution and where we're going, but it's a shot into the future, which is also kind of talking about Tomorrowland. So will all these things come true? No, but what Juan Enriquez, who is the speaker there, is trying to tell people is that we are primed for a massive expanse in our species, one that's going to be so much different than what we are today that it's arguable to say that we will even be the same species anymore.
And he plays with economics, and I thought it was interesting, and in fact maybe a little daring, because his recommendations, what he was saying we have to do, were things that progressive people, I mean, in fact, in some cases, they kind of laughed, and he cracked a joke saying, yeah, some of you are going to say when hell freezes over, but I just want to remind you that it snowed in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And they laughed about it, and so, like, he shows it on the screen, and he says some of these things are actually important, and when talking about longevity, humans living longer, a day and age where a policy is put in place for you to receive something at 65 when they thought you were going to die at 69.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you aren't dying at 69 anymore, then what do you do with that original number? That number was put there, that age was put there and decided on based on that.
Yeah.
So what do you do? And that's tough because there's a lot of people who say, well, I've been paying into this kind of program for a long time and I want to get it at this age. And now you're telling me I've got to wait longer if I don't live that long.
That's right.
And so they get upset. But he says there's a great big elephant in the room called the economy. So what I'm going to do, and this is him talking, is try to do in the next 17 and a half minutes, is to talk first about the flames, where we are in the economy. And then I'm going to take 3 trends that have taken place at TED over the last 25 years, and that will take place in this conference, and I'll try to bring them together, an ultimate sense of this kind of ultimate reboot and what it looks like. Those 3 trends, okay, and these are the important trends for him, are the ability to engineer cells, the ability to engineer tissue, and robots. And somehow it's all going to make sense. And he starts by saying, the government's been acting like Santa Claus. We all love Santa Claus. But the problem with Santa is if you look at the mandatory spending of what these folks have been doing and promising people, it turns out that in 1967, 38% was mandatory spending on what we called entitlements. Okay? Mm-hmm. By 2007, it was 68%. And we weren't supposed to run into the 100% until 2030, except we've been so busy giving away $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there that we've brought that date of reckoning forward to about 2017, which, interestingly enough, we're now here.
We have.
So we can, as the year progresses, we can see if this is a kind of one of those Back to the Future moments. Where,
and he's in camp with many other respected economists that say that there's a market correction due, which I know they always call for it, but a lot of them have been saying when you see the Dow go into record high levels and we are not seeing the unemployment match with that, where we know there's a lot of people out of work, it's a bubble. So whether we see it pop in 2017 or not, we'll see.
He says this stuff's going to get serious enough that if we don't start paying attention to the deficit, we're going to end up losing the dollar. And I know a lot of people who listen to the show may disagree with that.
Of course.
And I know Nathan, in fact,
I think it's permanent.
Yeah, Nathan, he has the voice of the show, one of the voices, along with my beautiful and amazing wife, Angela. Nathan has ideas about the dollar and debt and tax-free dollars, debt-free dollars, and things like this. But he says you've got to start banishing a word that's called entitlement. And the reason we have to do that in the short term is because we've just run out of cash.
Yes.
And this is TED Talks. This is not, not to say every TED Talk is a good talk. There's a lot of TED Talks that are just no good. But it's interesting to see the way he looks at it. He says, if you look at the federal budget, this is what it looks like as a pie chart. And he says the orange slice is what's discretionary. Everything else is mandated. It makes no difference if we cut out the bridges to Alaska in the overall scheme of things. That's a point being made against the Tea Party people.
Yeah.
He's saying, look, you're talking about, we just need to get rid of the bridges to nowhere. And John McCain, he used to do this all the time. He used to line up stuff about pork.
Yeah.
And talk about pork barrel spending and, studies that are done on the sex habits of deer or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or a sexually transmitted disease that deer get that doesn't affect humans, and they spent millions of dollars doing this kind of thing.
To look into it, yeah.
So he used to have this long list of this. Well, that long list of those things, including part of the bailout, I remember, was money given to bow and arrow makers and stuff, like for kids, for toys. That a lot of that stuff is in there. And he's saying that you can get rid of some of this stuff, but that's chump change.
Yeah, it's not the grand majority of the actual economy and where it's coming from. And he said we've got to start thinking about asking people to retire a little bit later. If you're 60 to 65, you retire on time. Your 401k just got nailed. If you're 50 to 60, we want you to work 2 years or more. If you're under 50, we want you to work for 4 more years. The reason why is that's reasonable. When your grandparents were given Social Security, they got it at 65 and were expected to check out at 68. 68 is young today. We've also got to cut the military about 3% a year. We've got to limit other mandatory spending. We've got to quit borrowing as much because otherwise the interest is going to eat the whole pie. And we've got to end up with a similar government, and we don't want to start changing these trend lines. We're going to lose the dollar if we start to look like Iceland.
And people laughed at that point.
Yeah.
Right? People laughed, and he says, but here's what you have if you don't address it. He talks about Japan back in the 80s, and he says, you got these 225 of the largest companies today, that they're worth 1/4 of what they were 18 years ago. And he says, if we don't fix this now, how would you like to see a Dow 3,500 in 2026?
Yeah, I believe it. And he's saying that there's some things that can help, but he says what's really important in this stuff is as we cut, we also have to grow, among other things, because startup companies are 0.02% of the U.S. GDP investment, and they're about 17.8% of the output. It's groups like this that are running the rooms that generate the future of the U.S. economy, and that's what we're going to keep growing. We don't have to keep growing these businesses or these bridges to nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you look at it and you say, he brings up a novelist. He says, there will come a time when you believe everything's finished, and that will be the beginning. And I think that that's so good. Is it Louis L'Amour?
Yes.
Anyway, I think it's a French novelist. And he says that's where these 3 trend lines come together. And listen, people can disagree over whatever policy should be done. Should people raise the retirement age? I know most of the listeners of this show would say no. I mean, that's a fact. And people who, if you say, well, should we tinker with that or tinker with this or tinker with that because we're living longer and because the stages aren't the same, the same people who say no are the same people who say that we should do that to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Because though it doesn't apply anymore in the way that it originally did.
Yep.
Because take for example the John Jay thing. America and its people were made for each other because we're all Christian and white and speaking English and all that. And they say, well, that's obviously ridiculous now. So that doesn't work. And in the same way, you say, well, if the standards for making the decision were set as they were, and that made it reasonable to choose what you did, then what happens if the game changes? What happens if people start living longer because of these advancements? And some of them are just amazing, Joe.
Well, a lot of them, yeah, they're huge advancements. But I think the other thing, too, is the answer isn't in making people work longer. The answer is making the companies shell out bennies more because they've got them. I mean, if this was 50-50, I wouldn't be making the argument. But 80% of the money sits at the top of all these big businesses. 80%. That's where your money to pay for 5 more years of letting Granny get oranges for 79 cents is going to come from. Is going to come from eliminating the huge golden parachute deals for CEOs and make the benefits packages for the workers better so you can still retire and the retirement pays for you for 2 or 3 more years. I think it's a simple fix.
I think there's, in fact, the owner of the station, Bob Goodrich, years ago gave me a book by Gar Alperovitz. I think it's called America Beyond Capitalism or something like that, America After Capitalism. And he's talking about theoretical economists all across the spectrum. I mean, all across it. And he's saying that there are claims that are made by people, for example, like Ron Paul, that about changes that can be made in the way that we structure businesses so that more people have ownership of the means of production. And this is coming from libertarians because that would be a volunteerist thing.
It's totally volunteerist.
And an ownership principle. And so approaching these topics from different perspectives, one of the best books I've read in a long time, Gar Alperovitz. You got to check it out. We're going to get back. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the final 15 minutes, so don't go anywhere.
Yeah, we're going to be diving into the science of it. It's going to be really fun to get into the heavy stuff. So stick around, folks. PaleoRadio will return.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact PaleoRadio at gmail.com.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
We just got a post on our Facebook page. You got to check it out, facebook.com/PaleoRadio. Mark Zuckerberg, by the way, you totally have to verify our Facebook page.
Yeah, we're sick of this.
We're sick of this nonsense. You have to verify it, and you got to take the sanctions off us.
Yeah, man.
You got to do
Lift
it.
those sanctions, buddy.
Lift the sanctions, Mark Zuckerberg. You know you're wrong. You know it ain't no good. All right? It's just mischief. But we have a post on here. It says, I think at this point, the FBI should file a motion to compel production of Trump's tax returns and subpoena a copy from the IRS to cross-check. They have now risen to the level of being considered evidence if the president of the United States was installed or was blackmailed by a hostile foreign government, which that's yet to be determined. That's what we're talking about. As the American people deserve to know, which is why the investigation, what you were talking about, calling for investigation. So thank you, Autumn, for posting that on our wall. I encourage everybody, again, check us out on Facebook. We post there all the time, and we're going to be posting a bunch of awesome videos, including one we posted just yesterday on how Paleo Radio makes money.
Yes, how do we make money?
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people hear us over the airwaves, which is great, and we love it. But they'll ask themselves, how do you guys actually make yourself some money? Well, we do it through listener. It's entirely listener-sponsored. You can go to Patreon to donate to our show, and like we always say, the show is free. We always want it to be free. But if you do like what we're doing, you can donate to us, and we ask to donate about $1 an episode, which would be $4 a month. And contribute to the show any way you can. But it allows us to be able to cover the topics we want to talk about without getting pushed back by different sponsors.
Speaking of a topic we want to talk about, right here, we're talking about this TED Talk about the future of humanity and human evolution and economics, the way things are playing out, and the way that people are just responding to circumstance.
And saying we're getting older, but the economy is basing us off of older ideas like we are not going to be living longer, even though the science is saying that we are.
Yeah. Craig Venter showed up last year to TED Talks and showed the people the first truly programmable cells. So this is a couple years back now. That acts like hardware. That you can insert DNA and have it boot up as a different species. In parallel, the folks at MIT have been building a standard registry of biological parts. So think of it as a Radio Shack for biology. You can go out and get your proteins, your RNA, your DNA, whatever, and start building stuff. In 2006, they brought together high school students and college students that started to build these odd creatures. They just happened to be alive instead of circuit boards. And these teams started competing. And there was a team from Taiwan that was pretty ambitious. They tried to engineer bacterias in such a way that they would act as your kidney. 4 years ago, he showed a picture to people, and everyone oohed and ahed because Cliff Tabin had been able to grow an extra wing on a chicken. And that was very cool stuff back then. But now, moving from bacteria engineering to tissue engineering, he wants to show people what happens next. And you have this almost extinct animal from Mexico.
Yes.
And what is that thing called?
Oh, that's Xochimilco is the city.
Yeah.
Almost extinct animal from Xochimilco, Mexico.
But what is the name of that animal, man?
An exolothat.
An exolothat. Exolothat.
Yeah, I don't know.
That can regenerate its limbs. You can freeze half its heart. It regrows. You can freeze half its brain. It regrows. But now you don't have to have the animal itself to regenerate because you can build clone mice molars in petri dishes. And, of course, if you can build mice molars in petri dishes, you can grow human molars
in petri dishes.
Yeah. So this is from his speech. This is stuff he's talking about.
Yeah, and he says a Spanish woman who's dying of TB had a donor trachea. They took all the cells off the trachea. They spray painted her stem cells onto the cartilage. She regrew her own trachea, and 72 hours later it was implanted. She's now running around with her kids. This is going on in Tony, I think it's Atala's lab in Wake Forest, where he's regrowing ears for the 9 women walking around Boston that have regrown bladders, which is much more pleasant than walking around with a whole bunch of plastic bags for the rest of your life.
Yeah, he's regrowing ears for injured soldiers. He's also regrowing bladders. So there's 9 women walking around Boston right now with regrown bladders.
So how do they do it, right? That's one of the questions too, is where are we getting these answers scientifically? How are we doing it?
Alien life forms, Joe.
Alien life forms.
Alien life forms is the obvious
Ancient
answer.
aliens is the answer.
I've watched History Channel.
You know, they never, just for a side note, they never say it, right? They never say that aliens did it. They ask it like a question. What if the Egyptians had help from aliens to build the pyramids, right? But anyways, the truth is, and this is me going off of the script a little bit to explain it, is the huge advancement has been in stem cell research. It's been in stem cell research because stem cells are the precursor to every other cell in every other body of every other living thing ever. So to think about that, before you get to a human Joe, you have a bunch of stem cells. Those stem cells turn into skin cells, eye cells, cells for your molars, your muscle tissue. Everything starts at stem cells. Now, what we always knew how to do is, if you took the analogy of a mountain, we always knew how to be at the top of the mountain and roll down. We knew how to take a stem cell and make a muscle cell. That was never a problem. The problem was always, how do you take a regular cell and convert it back into a stem cell? And we got a ski lift. To take the mountain analogy, there's a type of chemical that you can put onto it, and there's a type of stem cell research that we can do that allows us to regenerate natural cells that are maybe a bone cell or a skin cell and regenerate it back to a stem cell and regrow it. Basically saying you could take Jeremiah's cells from the inside of his mouth and regrow an ear for him. That we wouldn't need your ear cell.
We talked about that actually on the show.
Yes.
We talked about that up in the room when we used to record
Yes.
before we started coming into the studio on Saturdays actually.
Mm-hmm.
Before we started doing that, we used to broadcast the show out of the creativity studio in the attic of my house. And we talked about this very issue and about how you can now reboot skin cells and have them turn into stem cells.
Yeah, you can convert them back to stem cells, and then you can create anything you want from it.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's talking about somebody getting a swab of your DNA off of a cup and being able to clone you. I mean, we're not too far away, folks, for real.
Yeah, and then the third trend, robots. Those of us at a certain age grew up expecting that by now we would have Rosie the robot from the Jetsons in our house, and all we got is a Roomba. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
But we have more than that, and I'd say look at all the computers and stuff we have in our hands that we use. We're looking at a MacBook
Yes.
and we've got our iPhones. But Boston Dynamics, they have a thing called Big Dog. This is about as close as you can get to a physical Turing test, and he describes the Turing test this way: a Turing test is where you've got a wall. You're talking to somebody on the other side of the wall. And when you don't know if that thing is a human or animal, that's when computers have reached human intelligence.
Yeah, where you'd be able to have a conversation and not be able to differentiate that you're talking to a computer.
He says this is not an intelligence Turing test, but this is as close as you can get to a physical Turing test. And this stuff is moving very quickly. And by the way, that thing can carry about 350 pounds of weight. So we're talking, this
The thing that's
robot.
talking, yes.
Yeah. You've also got flies, the size of flies, that are being made by Robert Wood at Harvard. You've got sticky bots that are being made at Stanford. As you bring these things together, as you bring cells, biological tissue engineering, and mechanics together, you begin to get some really odd questions.
Yes, and this is the big one, because I think it gives a great idea of people's understanding of what he's talking about, because he brings up the Olympics. And Juan Enriquez says, in the last Olympics, this gentleman, he shows a picture, who had several world records in the Special Olympics, tried to run the normal Olympics. The only issue with Oscar Pistorius is that he was born without bones in the lower parts of his legs. He came within a second of qualifying. He came within about a second of qualifying. He sued to be allowed to run, and he won the suit, but he didn't really qualify for the time. The next Olympics, you can bet that Oscar, or one of Oscar's successors, is going to make the time. And 2 or 3 Olympics after that, they're going to be unbeatable. This is a group in Germany, and he shows another one, that's been beginning to engineer eyes so that people who are blind can begin to see the light and can begin to see light and dark. Very primitive. But then they'll be able to see shape. And then they'll be able to see color. And then they'll be able to see in definition. And one day they'll be able to see as well as you and I can. And a couple of years after that, they'll be able to see in ultraviolet. And they'll be able to see in infrared. And they'll be able to focus their eyes. They'll be able to come into microfocus. They'll do stuff that you and I cannot do. All of these things are coming together, and it's particularly important to understand that as we worry about the flames of the present, is to keep an eye on the future.
What is the surgery that Tiger Woods had? I remember it was LASIK.
LASIK surgery.
Yeah,
My
LASIK.
sisters had LASIK surgery.
Yeah, LASIK. You can see that kind of spawning even there. You say, wait a second, man. I mean, you can do a surgery.
Yes.
On somebody's eyes, and they can see like an eagle practically.
Yeah.
Well, this is a big deal.
That's true.
Right.
And not just this, but when he brings up the Olympics, what I think is important is he was saying the Olympics as it is not, we think about it as it's even and people have just worked hard. But he was saying like 20 of the 30 last deadlift champions have the same exact gene in their genome. It's a specific gene. No one has ever climbed Mount Everest without an ACE gene.
You used to say it's like a creepy club of people with a certain.
It is, yeah. It's like a creepy club of people. It's a sport for mutants.
Yeah.
It's a mutant sport. And what he's saying is, should we allow handicaps for people where when the technology catches up, you may say this, like Usain Bolt has the gene has some of the genetics built in to be faster. So do we give someone an offset time to offset his genetic advantage?
Or can
difference?
you use sports? Would it be classified as sports-enhancing drugs?
Or is it sports enhancing?
Yeah. So, and that would seem to be just really unfair. You're like, listen, I just simply don't have this gene. It seems like these guys are really unique to this club of people who have a particular...
But his example of Oscar Pistorius is another good one, too, where you say, look, this guy doesn't have legs, and he's competing in the World Olympics for speed times because of the technology and advancement of human evolution, that Oscar Pistorius is a mix of technological advancement and human mobility or organic mobility. And Juan Enriquez says, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a different species of hominid. I think we're going to move from Homo sapiens into Homo evolutus. And I think this isn't 1,000 years out. I think most of us are going to glance at it, and our grandchildren are going to begin to live it. And as a Homo evolutus brings together these three trends into a hominid that takes direct and deliberate control over its evolution and its species, her species and other species. And of course of that, it would be the ultimate reboot.
It's going to be amazing. You got to go back and listen to the whole segment because the show is over, Joe.
Yes, it is over.
I'm going to be hosting Cafe Inquiry on Sunday over at Schuler Books on 28th Street, so go check that out.
Yeah, make sure to be there. I'm going to be involved in some comedy here later on in the week. We'll give you the dates to it, but it's not going to be next week. So make sure to make it out to Schuler's Books and see Jeremiah.
Yep. Check us out on Facebook and make sure to follow us on Spreaker at Spreaker.com/PaleoRadio. Thank you for joining us and have a great week.